of the world. It's a pleasure to be here with you today at the Project Liberty's McCourt Institute on the campus of Sciences Po in Paris. I'm Constance Deleuze. I'm the executive director of the Institute, Project Liberty's Institute. You'll have the pleasure of interacting with some of my colleagues today, Paul Fellinger, Sarah Nicole as well. And we're very pleased to have you to talk about digital identity today, especially because we're launching a new initiative with a very important partner, the Human Technology Foundation. And we're very fortunate to have with us Eric Salobir, who is the president of the Human Technology Foundation. You're going to hear about digital identity today. You're also going to hear about some of the issues and the work that we're going to try to tackle through this new initiative that we're launching at Project Liberty's Institute with the Human Technology Foundation. And you'll also hear a little bit about how we operate, how we conduct our work here at the Institute. And this topic, this initiative, is going to be a perfect illustration of how we intend to work at Project Liberty's Institute. As perhaps you know, we've been founded in partnership with two major universities, Sciences Po here in Paris, but also Georgetown in Washington, D.C. I'm pleased to announce that we're actually revealing this week a third foundational partner for the Institute, which is Stanford. So that brings us to three important, really foundational partners. This also gives you an idea of how we operate. We're research-based. We activate our networks around within universities, but we're also action-oriented. Our intent is to create a bridge between academia, but also practitioners, policy makers, leaders of industry. We want them to make informed, enlightened decisions, and this is where we at the Institute with others intend to develop and propose some ethical governance frameworks for Web3. We're also forward-looking. We're not about fixing the flaws of Web2. We're really going to be working on emerging tech issues. We intend to co-create these governance frameworks with all of you. Finally, I'd like to insist on the fact that we intend to be multi-stakeholder. We have the chance of being based on the campuses of universities. This is a neutral, safe place to exchange, to discuss. And we already feel and notice that industry leaders, policymakers, academia feel comfortable in this setting. So this is really something we're going to nurture throughout our different governance initiatives, because we have other governance initiatives we'll be talking about this year. This is intended to be a neutral place where diversity is encouraged. We want to be open, we want to be inclusive, we want to hear about everyone to really co-create these new governance frameworks. So for today, we have a wonderful panel, and we have a wonderful moderator, Paul Fellinger, who's our Director of Policy and Governance at the McCourt Institute. So please, Paul, and I hope you enjoy the discussion.
A round of applause. Thank you very much, Constance. I'm really excited because we have an amazing panel, and I'm very delighted to welcome all of you here in the room as well, and remotely to this discussion. I was told those were the welcome remarks. Just a note, both for those online and for those in the room, this is a QR code to a Slido. If you want to take a quick picture like this, you can input your questions, and we will come back to them after the first round of key interventions. I leave it on for just a few seconds. And maybe I already start. Digital ID is a hot topic. I think we can all agree it's a topic of fundamental importance for the future of society, for the future of our economies. The topic of our discussion today, I see that most people took the picture. The topic of our discussion today is to look at Web3 and digital identity. And we want to talk about what is a human-centered approach to digital identity. There are three main factors why I believe that this is a very timely discussion. The first factor is that right now, governments, companies, but also citizens are wondering what the future of digital ID will be. It's a passport to so many activity in our societies and economies. The second factor is this is a very timely topic because digital ID is an infrastructure question. And like with every infrastructure, there's a moment when technology, cutting edge technology, goes to market, becomes widely adopted, mainstream adopted, and millions and billions are invested in certain infrastructures. And usually, if you think about other infrastructures in the world, they're then there to stay because a lot has been invested to bring them up to speed. So it's very important that we take a step back and ask ourselves certain questions about certain choices. And there's a third point why I believe it's very timely to have this discussion, which is the McCourt Institute is focused on responsible technology. So we really want to take, together with our amazing panelists today, an integrated view across technology, across markets, across ethics, across society, to really drill down. So instead of presenting the everybody and talking for way too long, I want to jump immediately into the discussion, and I want that all of our panelists, if you may, introduce yourself and please tell us why we need to talk about the future of digital identity from your perspective. And with this, I propose that we can maybe start, and I would give just the floor to Eric, who sits next to me. As Constance announced, we are launching at the together with the Human Technology Foundation at Project Liberties Institute an initiative on the future of digital identity. And the Human Technology Foundation, as the name might tell, has done some work in the past on what does it mean, a human-centered digital identity. So, Eric, if you can please quickly introduce you and tell you why we need to talk about this topic.
Thank you very much, Paul. I don't know if you can hear me well. So I'm the president of the Human Technology Foundation. It's a think tank and a do tank. So it means that on one side, we try to foster the reflection between different stakeholders on some key topics like this one, digital identity. And on the other side, we also try to design tools and methodologies for the public and private sector just to be more like hands-on, to be able to tackle with some of the difficulties that currently we're talking about. And so for me, we had the opportunity already to work on digital identity for the Canadian government. They asked us to build a kind of policy designs or guidelines for human-centric digital identity. And what does it mean? First, it means that if human is the center, the system is not the center. So technology is an enabler, but as you said, I mean, the human is the one who has to be taken in consideration first. It also means that the government or the company is not in the center. And it means also that the human, I mean, the user is not only a user, it's a human. So it means that terms and conditions are not key. What's key, it's human rights. And this is what we worked on actually to try to design a digital identity system that could really cope with those topics of the human rights. And what does it mean also? It means that a digital identity, it's much more than a credential or accreditation. I mean, for sure, it's key. But I mean, my identity is not only my name, it's not only that you can recognize me, it's all of what I am. So I don't know if I'm a lawyer, I mean, if I'm a physician or whatever, all of that, all my degrees, all my skills, all my abilities, all of that has to be integrated at some point in my identity. It's part of me, and at some point, I have to be able to value that also online and offline. And for me, just to answer in one word, why for me it's important to tackle with this topic is because digital identity is the connection, the key between our digital life and I would say our tangible one. I would not say real life because for me, all of that is real life. I mean, what I do online, I don't know if I buy a pizza online, I get a real pizza. So it's real life. But for sure, we have more and more interactions between those two sides of our life. And I don't want anybody to control the link between those two parts of my life.
Thank you very much. With this, I want to jump to the other side of the table and give the floor to Cecilia. Without preempting your introduction of yourself, I mentioned in the beginning that governments heavily think about the future of digital identity. You work with 38 different ones. Please tell us more about the work that you do and why this is so timely right now.
Yes, thank you very much. So yes, I work at the OECD, and I think many of you know a lot of what the OECD does. We work on a lot of topics related to digital transformation, and basically the work that we've done on digital identity has been ongoing for a long time, for almost decades. It started off with more work on electronic authentication and digital security from the colleagues in the Science, Technology, Innovation Directorate. But really, I think it has really matured the discussion in recent years, and now it's really seen, as you said before, it's seen as an infrastructure for society and for the digital economy. So I come from a part of the OECD that works primarily on questions around digital government. And of course, governments play a very big role in the digital identity ecosystem, not only as providers of ID solutions, but sometimes also providers of information about us, about companies, and so on. But to say that, which is not, we just launched a recommendation adopted, and a recommendation was adopted by the OECD ministers on the governance of digital identity. And it's an instrument that we developed over the last 2 years. And it's really been by the demand for countries who are a bit struggling. There's a very variety in how countries are approaching this. In some countries, there's a very high level of adoption. In others, both in the public sector, but in the private sector as well. And in others, it's really hard. And it's very hard to compare these countries, but they need more guidance in terms of governance, in terms of other aspects. So that's why we are really providing this recommendation, focusing more on the governance aspect. So not focusing too much on the technology, although that is, of course, very important, but it's not the main focus of the recommendation. Yes, that I think that would be, and what, did I miss something with the question? Sorry, at the end.
No, I think it's very interesting, and maybe just for us in the room to understand, why is the recommendation coming now and not, as you said, the OECD has been working for years already on related topics. Why is now the moment that we go to the next step, basically, in the governance of ID systems?
I think there are different factors, but there's been a lot of international discussions. I think the colleagues here have different perspectives on why this is important right now. But from our perspective as an international organization, there's a lot of discussion happening at the international level. So the G20, the G7 are also starting to talk about these issues. But then also at the country level, there are countries that are, I'm talking for the government perspective, but like they are very much advanced in providing digital services and from the outside, but the infrastructure is lacking, which makes it not as smooth and seamless, and it's hard for people to access services. So they really see that this aspect of identity is so core that it has to be there, and this is a big challenge for some countries. So that's why it's really, some countries need this and others are really far ahead, and they just already recognize that this is important, so they are very much fine that we're doing it. But then also we see these new developments with the wallets and the decentralized identity, which is, even in countries that are quite centralized or have centralized systems, it's also recognized as a very important step. So there's a whole bunch of things.
That is incredibly interesting. So we heard from governments. So now I would like to hear more from the industry. So we have Raphael with us, who's leading an innovation ecosystem that looks also at the market for digital identity. So maybe, Raphael, can you introduce us, tell us a bit about yourself, tell us a bit about what you do, and tell us a bit, like, if you look at the market and the market dynamics, the different, both startups and incumbents, what's the status of digital identity? Is this currently a hot topic?
So the answer is yes. So good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for the invitation. So just before looking at the future of identity, just a few words on the past. In fact, we are on the third wave of digital identity. So the first one was really putting a chip on a passport to avoid forgeries. So this was an important step. And actually, currently, when you want to have a fake passport, the first thing you do is to destroy the chip. So that's easy to detect. The second wave that we saw more in the year 2000 is having the credit card format of the identity to open up for e-government services. And we've seen a lot of developments, maybe less in Europe because it was really for countries that wanted to step a generation as they went directly for mobile phone and for mobile payment. And what we are facing now is a third wave where everything will end up in the phone like anything else. And that's where we found the wallet and the credential. So at Thales, we are a European leader in terms of cybersecurity and government systems. And it's clear that it's a hot topic because it's the basic for the digital transformation of the states and nations. And it's opening up more trust in the whole ecosystem, either the private one or the public one.
Maybe if I can just ask a question, a sort of clarification to just understand the market of digital identity solutions. We heard about governments, we heard about companies. So can you tell us a bit, is digital identity, are those companies or technology providers working with governments, or is there also a B2B component?
A very good point. It actually depends from regions and geographies and culture. In fact, depending, it's clearly a moment where everything is getting reorganized, and that we can see three types of players that could be identity providers. So the first one, the most obvious one, the closer to the users are the big techs because they're already in the pocket of everybody. So they could be the global ID provider. Second type of players is states themselves. They are already issuing identities, so they could extend it in the digital world and issue digital IDs that could be loaded different places. And also in some places of the world, especially in the Nordics or in some part of Asia, it's consortium of large operators because the trust is neither in the big tech, neither in the states, it's either banks or telecommunication operators. And they are the one getting an alliance and getting a digital identity. So to take an example, in Europe, in the Nordics, all digital ID transaction authentication are done through the banking systems, even to get access to your e-government. So that's where the trust is, and that's where citizen consumers are giving, let's say, peacefully the delegation of identity or their digital identity.
I think this raises already a very interesting point that we should come back later, which is that there are cultural approaches apparently to the topic of digital identity and regional preferences over some approaches and other approaches as the world basically decides what infrastructure they will use. So talking about what infrastructure the world will use, if I look around here, the physical room, who of you has heard concretely about Web3 Digital ID solutions? If you could just raise your hand, just to understand. I think it's a good majority in the room. So this is a bit also the topic today that we want to drill down. But before we get into the weeds, I want to hand over to Ingo, and he is actually leading a very interesting Web3 digital identity system that he can tell us a bit more about. And I also want to use the opportunity because in order to have this discussion on infrastructure and markets and ethics and responsibility and governments, we need to get the facts straight. So when we talk about identities, there are those different approaches, centralized, federated, decentralized. Maybe, Ingo, if you can also tell us a bit more about the different technological choices and what makes decentralized approaches special.
So hi, I'm Ingo. I'm working in Web3 since 2017. I've been working with the Decentralized Identity Foundation since 2018, so I'm pretty much into identity and Web3. I'm also the founder of Kilt Protocol, which is an implementation of DIDs and verifiable credentials, but that's already in the deep of technology. So I think what's important to understand about decentralized identity is that it's not a new thing. This is something we have for 500 years now and is working fine. Your identity, especially not talking about your identity card. You talk very much about your identity card. You said identity is much more than the card, right? So, so if I talk about identity, I don't speak about the card. I mean your identity. So your personal identity that you already have in the physical world is a very, very decentralized thing because it is based on so-called identifiers, which is your face, your fingerprint, your signature. And those things are very decentralized because they have not been given to you by a government or a company or anything. You made them yourself. And this is really important, you can't switch those things off, right? Can't switch off my face, at least not in a way which is culturally accepted. So this is the basis of identity. It's called an identifier. And then what we do in the physical world that we know for 500 years is that we start adding credentials to that. So some of them come from the government. They are like a passport. Some of them come from universities. They're like a university degree. Some of them come from the public library because it's a library card. And they're always connected a bit with my identifier because they have my name on, they have my face on, they have my signature on, they have things on which identify me. And this is also decentralized because no one is out there who says you can issue credentials, but you can't. Everyone can. You can go and issue credentials to people. I don't know if they're really worth something, but you can do that. So it's a free world. So it's also from the market side, it's a very free world. So the physical world is totally free and it is very, very privacy preserving because whenever I use my credentials, the issuer of the credential is not part of the transaction. If I go with my passport and buy whiskey and prove that I'm, I don't know, more than 18, then the government is not informed about that transaction. This is privacy preserving because they can't collect my data. It is also totally scalable because everyone can use their passport at the same time for doing things without any server going down. And yeah, that's pretty cool, actually. We have a fantastic system. And what we demand, actually, and this was the core of the work of the DIF for the last 7 years, is that in the digital world, we want to have at least what we had in the physical world. It doesn't necessarily have to be better, would be nice, but it shouldn't be worse. And this is why we think that identity solutions should be decentralized because they already are. And if you centralize them, no matter if you give the central power to a company, which we see in the Web 2 very much where Facebook and Google have accumulated a lot of power, which is really, really dangerous, or if we do it in the way that now the government gets that and the government steps up from issuer of credential to issuer of identifier, then it is worse than it was before. So this is where we have to take care. And normally decentralized solutions will probably be the key to it, because if the person holds their credentials, which I do today, in my pocket there's credentials, right? And I choose who to show them and when and for what reason, and which part of the credential. I can even put my finger on part of it. So I have a lot of rights. If this goes away, or if someone can switch off my identifier in the end and switch off my digital identity, when identity becomes more important in our life, or digital identity becomes more important in our life, which is going to be the case in the next 10, 20 years, then the power that central organizations have is so dangerous that we have to really, really be careful what we do, and decentralization is probably the key.
Thank you. Are there still people in the room who have questions about the difference between centralized approaches and decentralized approaches? Because that's the basis for if we want to go a bit deeper.
Yes, can you please explain the core differences between decentralized and
centralized? Decentralized is what we have today in the physical world. So you are identified with a totally decentralized thing. You are the most decentralized subject that you can find because you are totally different than anyone else. And everyone can be an issuer, and you hold your credentials in your pocket, right? When you have them in your pocket, it's already very, very much decentralized. If your credentials lay in one server, which is owned by Facebook or so, and it's not decentralized anymore, then it's centralized because they own the credentials. If they also own things like your identifier, like your Facebook ID, then it becomes really dangerous because they own everything and they decide what to do with the credentials, who to show them to, for what reason, and so on. And you're not even part of the transaction. Yeah, so this is the difference between centralized and decentralized. So in the centralized world, you have always one server where everything is stored, or where a lot of things are stored, which has somebody who controls it, and this somebody who controls it can possibly switch things off, delete them, add things, whatever. In a decentralized world, everyone is basically responsible for holding their keys, holding their credentials. Like if you lose your wallet today, you're in trouble, right? You have to go to all those institutions which gave you the credentials and say, hey, I lost my wallet, I have to start over again. This is decentralized. It is not as practical as centralized because you can lose stuff, but actually you should be used to it because you have been using it all your life.
There's another question.
I'm not from France, but so can I give it to someone from France?
France Connect.
Just for the remote audience, the question was, there's a French government-issued system which is called France Connect, and the question is, isn't that already centralized? Raphael, if you...
Yes, the France Connect initiative is in fact a credential issued by the government to identify you online. It's fully centralized because it's verified against the system owned by the state. But there are other solutions that were mentioned. And again, it depends really on the strategies, the culture, and how the ecosystem is evolving on the type of solutions.
Yeah, what we can say is there are other options, and there's a possibility to use one or another depending on what you want to do. And I understand that the government, for all the tax issues, want all the citizens to use a specific credential. Why not? But then with this one, you can do other type of things, but there's a kind of interoperability among them. Yeah. And the question is, do we think we can provide other, like alternative ones, which will probably be more like human-centric, so you will more easily manage the data and know how it's used and how the data are used. For example, in countries like the Nordic countries, when or in Estonia, for example, when the data is used by an institution, you receive a notification. So that can be useful. And but I would go to a bit further than you. I mean, you want at least the digital ID to be as convenient and powerful as the tangible one. I'm much more demanding. Actually, I want it to be much better. I mean, I agree. If you lose your ID, you're in trouble. There's a way to have, I mean, on digital ID to have it back. You say when you show your ID to buy alcohol or enter in a nightclub, for example, for a young woman or man, I mean, your name is on it, your address is on it. I mean, if you have kids, you can hide it a little bit, but I mean, if you have kids, I'm not so sure it's super safe. I mean, the best way is to be able to show that you're more than 18 years old, but without providing your name,
and
without or your date of birth or whatever. Just the fact that they can have you in, and that's what digital ID can be useful for. So it's not only for digital life; it's also for the tangible life. And for example, a French company issued such a system for Monaco, and you can just show a QR code with your picture, and they don't know who you are. They just know that you're more than 18 years old.
I hope that this clarified a bit. We can discuss it more in length. You understand that those are architecture choices. Those are very technical topics that actually have great consequences. And as I was saying in the beginning, those technologies, once governments and companies made heavy investments into them, they are usually there to stay for a while. So before we go to the Web3 part and really delve into this, the challenges and the opportunities that this technology can provide for society and the economy, I want to do a sort of rapid fire. So you understand that we are at the intersection of technical architecture choices, markets, and ethics. And I want to understand sort of, and you heard already a number of concerns that were mentioned. I would like to do a sort of rapid fire, going maybe starting from the right to the left. What are your top 2 to 3 ethical concerns with regards to the future of digital identity? If you just keywords, top 2 to 3 spontaneously coming out of your mind.
Digital ID in general or decentralized?
Digital ID in general and those future choices that we need to make.
Inclusion, one of them. Security or risk, like risk management, or considering risks in general. And also understanding context, or like, I mean, that's not maybe the future, but like really understanding, because as what you said, like also as part of this discussion, it's really important to understand that what might be a problem here is not a problem, is seen as a problem somewhere else. So it's important.
The cultural differences or regional
cultural,
differences.
Because of historical context, because of how many different factors, but because we have countries in the OECD, we have countries from the UK where there's no ID card. There's never going to be an ID card. I mean, that's not about digital identity, but it's also important to have that context in mind. I come from Sweden, where we have a personal ID number issued at birth, and I have that my whole life, and it's a unique identifier. And it's quite high level of trust in government, for example, high level of trust in institutions, and that plays a role in what you can and cannot do, and also the acceptance. So it's important to keep in mind.
Fascinating. So let's keep the spirit that was but it was incredibly interesting. It was incredibly interesting. So we have inclusion, risk management, and context. Ingo, what are your 2 to 3?
I'm just adding one. Privacy. I think privacy is kind of a human right. And it should be always thought about when it comes to digital identity and interacting with different entities. So I'd like to just add this, also second on everything that you said.
Raphael, what would be the 2-3 things?
So maybe more on the technical side. For me, there is 3, let's say, foundations that are used. So it's biometry, all with their problems, ethical problems. So biometry, cryptography, and proof of life.
Proof of life?
Yes.
Can you explain this a bit more to us?
Yes, for sure. So in fact, when we will do digital identity, as Eric was saying, we will converge 3 identities which are currently living their life differently. So we have the identity in real life, so who we are when we meet, when we talk, when we buy things at the butcher. There is the identity when we are online, and there is actually no strong link between the two. And we can have multiple digital identities. And then there is the identity of who we are in front of the law, the responsibility we have, and the fact that we can go after. So I agree that privacy is definitely a human right, safety for also. And so it's important that when we merge those 3 identities, we have to rely on biometry to unify the digital one and the physical one. We have to rely on cryptography to link the legal one and the digital one. And in fact, to make sure that I'm not impersonated, that my identity is not stolen, I need the 3rd basis, which is the proof of life, meaning that I am really the one activating the digital identity or the legal identity.
Very interesting. Your top 2, 3, Eric?
I would say 2. First, for sure, is just to try to prevent any risk of being controlled and manipulating, but it goes in the way you were already mentioning. But for me, this is key. It's not only privacy is important, but it's just the fact that knowing what we do, where we are, with whom we interact, and so on, I mean, we see so easily so many opportunities for some governments or for some private companies to try to nudge or manipulate us. And this is, I mean, this is something like keeping our freedom. And the second one is convenience. I mean, the user experience has to be really high level. The big problem, each time we have some devices or technologies which are highly secured. I mean, speaking about the president's phone, for example, I mean, he uses the iPhone. Why? Just because the other one is too complex. And so actually, we need to find a way for everybody to be able to use easily and in a very useful way these kind of technologies. Otherwise, people will not use them or bypass them, and it will be terrible. Those two.
I think that gives us a sort of very interesting scene setting. So we understand it's about future architecture choices, and we understand that they're really high stakes for society, and we understand that it's a very complex web between markets, technology, society, governments, and commercial activity. So now we want to come a bit to yes, I forgot something in the dimension.
No. I wanted to react, but no, you didn't forget anything.
I wanted to construct a very nice segue, but keep the thought. You will be able to chime in immediately, or is it a reaction to your 2 points? Then quickly do it.
Don't worry. Go ahead.
Okay. So we at Project Liberties Institute released 2 weeks ago a new governance brief, and this governance brief asked the question: what is a fair personal data economy for the social web, for interactions among humans? And what we looked at in this governance brief were 3 pillars of a fair personal data economy. There's the control of users of their personal data. There's interoperability between services, platforms, interactions online. And there's the notion of the possibility by design to be able to participate in the economic value creation that is done with your data. I believe that digital identity has a very important role to play with regards to the future of a fair personal data economy. And some of you might not know, but we at the Institute have a very interesting mission and task, which is not only to catalyze actionable research, to lead governance initiatives, engaging various stakeholders. We are also the steward of a decentralized social networking protocol, of a open source infrastructure protocol that could potentially fulfill, or does fulfill in action, those ambitions. And digital identity is a big question mark. Sort of what is the best system for digital identity to choose for the future? So let us now look at Web3 and decentralized technologies. And I would like to start with very obvious questions. As with every technological choices, there are pros and there are cons. If we can have your views on and again go around the table, what do you see are the great benefits and massive potentials for decentralized digital ID system, and for whom? And what are also challenges with regards to the adoption of Web3 technology for digital identity? So maybe we can start. And Eric, you had a thought. I don't know if that was related to that. Otherwise, I give you the opportunity to quickly say that as well, or we will start at the other end with Cecilia.
Okay. Now, just I agree. It's a question of infrastructure, but first of all, it's a question of social acceptance. I mean, you can build the best infrastructure if people don't want it, they will never use it. And so I think we need to be focused on what will really be useful for the people, and then start from that instead of trying to build the big picture, what's beautiful, and then try to convince people to join us. I mean, bottom up is much easier than top down for this kind of. I mean, we see that France Connect is not used a lot. We have also a digital identity by La Poste, which is pretty well done actually and respectful for privacy and so on. But who uses that?
So,
I mean, who uses this kind of digital identities except to pay the tax, for example? But just raise their hand. 3, 4. Okay,
there might be
5. 5. Yeah, when you force, but without that, yeah, you don't. So for me, the question is, how do you create this feeling of urgency and interest and the willing, this kind of social adoption, and then you will see what people want, and probably it will be decentralized. Obviously, people will want to keep their privacy and so on. But let's try. I mean, it will be a balance between many things, including the convenience, including safety, including privacy. And we see that, unfortunately, so many people click on to connect through Facebook just because it's convenient. They know that it's not respectful of their privacy, but it's just one click. Instead of what, you can enter plenty of data. I mean, they don't want to do that. So we need to find the right balance between those different things. Otherwise, people will bypass it.
So just to ask again the question, so that means for you, decentralized ID, the big pro is that it's user-friendly, and you expect that there's a very large adoption?
I mean, it will be used only if it's user-friendly. I mean, the fact that it's decentralized, it's not enough for an adoption. I mean, just talking with some providers of digital identity and this kind of technologies, one said, "Oh, I don't understand. We provide very safe space on internet, and you can keep all your files very safe." But nobody used that. I say, why? I say, oh, but you open, you click that, you click that. It's super long, it's super complex. Otherwise, you just drag and drop on Google Drive, and everybody uses Google Drive. And they know that it's not so safe, but you spare so much time. So we need to find the right balance between those different elements. Otherwise, the fact that it's just respectful of human rights will not be enough as an incentive to have massively those kind of technologies adopted.
So do I understand that then the downside or the current challenge is that it's just a technology that is very difficult to use in your view?
What I mean is that user experience always goes over safety or privacy and so on. For massive adoption, I don't mean for people who really take care about privacy and so on, working in NGOs, whatever, but I mean for anybody in the street, user experience is the top priority.
That is a very interesting point, I think, to consider. Cecilia, maybe if we, I'm wondering, given that you have been historically dealing with issues of personal information processing and now digital identity, what are the discussions within the OECD on decentralized digital ID solutions? And can you tell us from your point of view, where do you see the benefits of the technology and where do you see the challenges?
Yes, so we have talked to a lot of countries, or most countries, not all of them, and I would say that it's a topic that is being at least looked at by everyone right now. But I think it really depends on where you're at and the background, where you're coming from. I mean, if you come from the Nordics that we have talked about so much, of course, they are looking at this as well, but you might think that they have a system that works quite nice and people use it. There's like 95% adoption and people use it for access everything. Why should we do something else when there's so high trust? But then in other countries, this is a natural way to go. But I think that it's hard to say, but many countries are looking at it. I think like Germany has been doing some things, and Spain. I think there are many countries that are trying to look at this also because you don't want to be like left behind. You don't want to have all the other countries like racing towards this and you're left behind. But in terms of so in the recommendations that we have, we do emphasize the need to look more at making it easier for, it's hard to talk about, we don't talk about explicitly decentralized or so, because it's still very hard to say what's best, but we try to make it easier, at least for individuals, to share information about themselves and to have more control and to see what's happening, and if that is ownership of your data or if that is having greater agency and more transparency. It's hard to say, but we are very much supportive. We don't recommend or we don't talk about a specific technology, because that's also something that this is a field that's technology, or this is rapidly evolving. So we don't know where we're going to be in a decade or more. But we're not against it. And so the recommendation in a way supports it. But I think, of course, user control and having more insights and seeing what's happening with your data is good. But then also, so what you said is like the challenges, and maybe it's the governance aspect, like building the trust in these systems is not something that is to take for granted. And also the aspect about if you make everything the individual's responsibility, is that something that all individuals want? Like, do I want to have control over all my data? I mean, is that something that everyone wants? Maybe if privacy, I mean, this sounds strange, but if privacy is a very important thing for me, or like I do not trust the government, I do not trust institutions, yes. But if maybe convenience is important for me, other aspects, it's important to have those in mind. It's a challenge.
I want to piggyback on something, because I'm not sure that everybody understands this. We suddenly talk about data control, but the topic of our discussion is digital identity. Could one of you volunteer to just clarify what the link is between the choices of digital identity system and your ability to control your data, and what do we actually mean by your data? What type of data could we control, and how are those choices, whether it's a centralized government issued, private company issued, a federated or a decentralized system, what has this to do with data control? Rafa.
So I will try. So there are many data around us. So the data that qualifies us, the data that we produce, the data we exchange. So first of all, around the identity, as you said, there is credentials to attest who you are and to verify who you are. And there is a number of attributes. Very simple attributes can be my name, date of birth, place of birth. Then there is others, my bank account number. Then linked to that, there is all the transactions going with it, and so on, so on. It's like a tree of all data being linked in the end around my identity. And so the question is, should I keep everything in my pocket? Should I keep some of the nodes of those data in my pocket? Should I trust somebody to hold them and to be able to exchange them? And so the key thing, and I think for me it's not linked to centralized or decentralized, is what is called the zero knowledge proof. Is exactly what you said, is the ability to answer a question without having to share the data, verifying the question. So what am I older than 18? The answer is yes or no. It's not. Your date of birth is da, da, da. So, and the important thing, and I think it's very cultural, is how comfortable you are with sharing your date of birth, how comfortable you are with sharing your bank account number, which is sometimes linked to your personal account number, and that kind of thing. And in the end, to answer the question, to go further, I think it's not a matter of technology. It's a matter of who do you trust, and then this body organize itself either centrally or decentrally.
Very, very interesting. I hope this. Please.
I'd like to add something to all three of you, actually, because we have been like a little bit now on the market, and we see how these things are accepted and how the user interface things are actually done, and how important governments are in this thing. And we have experienced a couple of interesting things. So first of all, it's not all about the people and how the people perceive what is about their data, and so there's some people who care about that, and there's many people who don't care about it. It's very much about industry. Decentralized identity holds a lot of business cases. This is what's really important, because when I am an issuer of a certain credential, which says you are this person because I KYC'd you successfully, or which says you are a nice person because I know who nice persons are and everybody believes me, then I have a business model behind that. And these business models are huge, and people start earning money with it. This is what we see when companies, big international companies, start to jump on the Web3 train for digital identity, because they see, oh wow, there's a lot of money to earn in these things as a provider of trust, basically. And this is what we have the feeling is currently happening all over the world in many, many ways, not only with our company, also others. So decentralized identity becomes more important, but it does not become more important because all the governments at the same time sit together in the OECD and say, yeah, let's jump on that. They will not. Because in technology, you've seen that with the internet, governments are normally not first. What comes first is industry. Industry starts making money, then it becomes the standard, and then later the governments jump on. Right? This is the thing that we will see. And one more thing to user interface. When we come from the Web3 world, we normally come from the blockchain world. The blockchain world puts security above everything. And first of all, you have to write down 12 words. Otherwise, you can't work. When you work with industry, and we just onboarded, I think, Europe's biggest publisher, they wanted to use this decentralized identity for a single sign-on for all their customers and all their publications. They said, what's this? We can't, no one can work with that. Let's make a download button for the 12 words so that you can have them on your hard disk. The blockchain people say, you can't do that. This is totally insecure. But in the end, it's just the login. Of course you can do that, right? Then the next company came and said, okay, this is too complicated. We don't want to download. Let's use the iPhone and put it on Apple Cloud. Yeah, it's just a login. Yes, of course you can do that, right? It's not breaching totally all the security. So you can make the user experiences much easier. And if you have at one point a wallet which you can use to log into multiple companies and also use it with your bank and so on, but you have all the data in this wallet, then the user experience will in the end be even better than before. And this is where we have to go. So adoption is the key. What we have to manage for Web3 and identity is get industrial adoption running. And if we do that, then governments will automatically jump on the train, and the users will automatically jump on the train because they get new benefits from it because somebody wants to earn money with them. This is how it works.
So I think it's very important to highlight the commercial drivers. Ingo, if I may, the question was also sort of the challenges and the downsides of adoption, sort of from both a commercial but also a societal perspective. You mentioned sort of usability. Where do you see the biggest challenge in the adoption of decentralized identity systems? Still you.
The 12 words. So the 12 words is the worst. Right now, log in with Facebook is which you can use in different blockchains. For example, those which you mentioned, like the social media project of this family here. So we're working together with them. We're rolling this thing out. We take care that the decentralized identities that we produce are compatible with all the others, which follow the same standards, which is called DIDs and verifiable credentials. 300 companies using them, including Microsoft, IBM. So it's compatible, and we're not making like small villages, and people can use them over many systems. So this is where it becomes really practical, and the challenge goes away when you don't have to write down the 12 words. It's just a little bit different of a type of using the internet. But I can say, remember what I say maybe in 6 months. Using the internet in 6 months will be so different from now for every one of you, because search results will change totally. It will be AI and not links anymore. Within the next 6 months, this is happening. So the usage of the internet will become conversational in 6 months. You will all get used to it. Changing it a little bit does not matter if it's practical in the end.
I want to come to Raphael and ask the same question, and then I want to give the floor or read out one question that we got from our remote participants. So for you, what are the big opportunities for decentralized identity systems? And for you, what are the big challenges?
So there is definitely pros and cons. So the biggest, let's say, hurdle we might have with the centralized is that the central player, even though it may start as a technical provider, ends up to be in control. So for example, if we look at payments at the beginning, so every bank said, okay, we could have a technical player in the center doing the transaction and it would be fine. So in the end, it created the Visa and the MasterCard of the world. So I think they're not bad, but still they are in the middle and then we cannot remove them. So as if one day they become evil, we'll have an issue in the payment ecosystem. So the question is, if we go for a centralized model, who do we put as technical integrator of this? And how can we make sure that it doesn't take full control in the end and be at least a necessary element of the transaction. On decentralized, on the contrary, I think there is clearly an adoption point of view because there is we talked a lot about the end user or the citizen experience, but there is the whole ecosystem experience. Is it easy for merchants? Is it easy for government portal? Is it easy for all players to integrate? That's key. I think for me, again, I don't think really it's a technical matter. It's really who do you trust to give your identity to? And I will give you an example. In Saudi Arabia, it's heavily centralized, but people are very happy with it because in the end, they know that the identity is controlled by the ministry. So all the middlemen, all the guys that were corrupt in the middle, they don't have anything to play. So there is other problems in Saudi Arabia, but at least on that one, they are very happy with the centralized model.
This is, I think, a very interesting point that actually resonates and builds a very nice bridge to the question that we have on our platform. You're all familiar with the concept of internet fragmentation. It's a topic I personally worked a lot on in the past decade or so. So it sounds as if we have a bit of a fragmentation worldwide due to cultural preferences, due to the pace of technological adoptions, due to some governance choices in one region versus another. And it sounds that interoperability should probably be a topic we should talk about. So maybe two questions. One, why should we talk about interoperability and digital identity? And the question was specifically, I think, towards you and the OECD, Cecilia. What can international cooperation do in that regard? And then I also want to build a segue to our topic of Web3 as a human-centered technology and its potential to be a human-centered technology. How do we look at interoperability with decentralized identity? Is that more interoperable than a federated or centralized system? But maybe let's start with the bird view. Are there discussions on global interoperability of identity systems now that we make those massive investments in infrastructures that are supposed to be there to stay in for the future?
Yes, it's actually one of the big questions that we had, and I think what maybe many countries see as the added value of the OECD, because we have a group of countries that are relatively like-minded and share some common principles and have some of the foundations there in place that might make it easier to try to talk about this. Interoperability in general, it's also when you talk about the usability aspect. So when we talk about it should be high adoption, or we want to have high adoption, we want solutions to be convenient and usable. If you are not, this might not be possible everywhere, but in some countries where there is high adoption, you can use one solution perhaps to access both public and private sector services, for example. And then you have the next step, which is then accessing services once you go abroad, or even before you go abroad. That's what we see nowadays. It's a lot of discussions about this. There's not so much implementation being done because it's a very hard topic and it requires a lot of work, and also because there are systems in place that are not interoperable at the moment. But you see what's being done now at Europe is an attempt to try to make this happen with the wallet and with the protocols that they are developing. And it's also sort of a way to make it more usable, and so that in that way people will want to use it. But it's really, I think it's quite far ahead in the future for many countries, and many countries are even just starting to handle this domestically, and so looking at cross-border levels is really far ahead. But of course, it's always good to have this discussion in mind when you work at the national level.
There's a direct reaction from Slido that I just want to give to you as a very quick follow-up question. The person says, I'm from Spain. Will we have a European digital ID or a national one? And how will they work together, or will they be separated? Can you maybe just say a few words on that? Sorry to put you on the spot.
So I don't work for the European Commission, but I can... how I understand it, and that might be wrong, or maybe someone else is better to explain. I think that there just be like protocols and specifications that enable interoperability between systems that are you are given the solution in your country. So it will not be, I think they call it will be the same interface, but they will still be no access, no European central access to your identity data. That's how I understand it. So there will still be Spanish. I don't want to talk, but that's how I understand it. There will still be Spanish ID cards and solutions.
Thank you. So, Eric, you want to answer?
No, I have no secret information to share with you coming from Brussels. No, it's just like a reaction. I mean, you were talking about fragmentation. I think we will have like big areas of people sharing the same kind of concerns and cultures, and I mean, it's not only a question of convenience; it's a kind of trade-off between the different aspects like privacy and the other ones. And for example, if we take the example of India, they have a very centralized system, which is with face recognition and so on. So, I mean, I would say for us, it would never be suitable. But in a country where hundreds or millions of people were born without any registration in the administration, so they have no official name, they have no official property, they have no official right. And this system, which seems for us to be terrible because it doesn't fit with our culture, provides them human rights. Before, I mean, they can just be slaves. I mean, it's very difficult. And the implementation of this system, which also fits with a lot of people who are pretty underprivileged and undereducated, was the possibility during the pandemic to give the vaccine to everybody. And actually, it was pretty efficient. But it doesn't fit with our culture. So probably, I guess that in Europe, we will find a way to have more or less intercompatible systems, and that will be nice. And we need perhaps to see what we want to design for our environment, knowing that in other places probably people will make other choices. But I mean, a human-centric AI is also ID is an ID also, or a system which respects the preferences of each culture. Not try to impose globally something.
I just want to add to that a little bit, because it sounded a little bit like, hey, in Europe we do everything right and human rights first. Especially if you look at the EIDAS 2, which is the framework which Europe brought out. It is very, very, very dangerous because when you look at what we said in the beginning, your face is yours, and the DID, the decentralized identifier, has to be produced by yourself on your computer. This is not the case there. It's produced by your nation state. That means that your nation state can switch you off digitally, which I find very, very dangerous because we are living in a democracy, and democracies, if they have my data and if they have the control over my digital identity, they will not give it away, also not after the next election. And you don't know what happens after the next election. That can be really, really dangerous. And this is something where we have to look at what the politicians are doing there for us, which we somehow have the feeling that it's totally decentralized and very, really nice because the credentials are all ours now. But the core of the identity is the identifier. And if you use a system if you believe in decentralized worlds and stuff. If you use a system where you don't own the identifier, then you have a system which is worse than the system that we have in the physical world, because in the physical world we own them. So please, everyone, be careful. Where is the identifier generated? Was it on your computer? Was it yourself? Was it on your device? Or was it somewhere else? If it's somewhere else, not good.
May I just ask and take advantage that you have the microphone, a follow-up question on this notion of interoperability, because we still want to drill a bit down on this. Are decentralized digital IDs more interoperable than centralized ones?
Well, in the Web3, we have a nice history of failure with identity systems. Newport, probably many people heard in 2015, fascinating technology. No one used it, and it didn't work, and they just vanished from the market. And then the problem was still there, right? The solution, there was a nice solution. Nobody wanted the solution, but still there was the problem of the Web2, where identities got very, very centralized with just a couple of companies. And then industry basically came together and said, we have to change that in a way, and we have to change it in an interoperable way and in a standardized way, because industry will never jump on something that a cool startup from Paris just has thought of, because probably in 2 years they're gone. We cannot invest in systems of those people. So industry has to come together and sit together, and I was there for 5 years, and we sat together and standardized, and everyone agreed on, if we do decentralized identity, we do it exactly this way. This is how the documents look. This is how the ID looks. This is what it can do. This is what it can't do. So it's all written. It's all been written down, but that's not enough. It's also necessary that you find an institution which is recognized internationally. In our case, it was the W3C. That's the guys who also standardized HTTP and stuff, so everybody knows that. And when it comes to internet, they're normally trusted. And we took the road to get this standardized there. So now, since last year, it's actually officially standards of the VCs, the verifiable credentials, and the DIDs are now standards. And it makes them in a way interoperable, because they are all looking the same. It still has a lot of freedom how you implement them. So it's not automatically that if you get a DID, you produce it with our system on your computer, that this is 100% compatible to the Microsoft DID. It will look a little bit different, but there are systems which convert one to another, and they are already implemented and they're there. So it is not 100% what we want, but compatibility is key to it, because we made it this way, because otherwise industry cannot start investing in projects like that. So yes, interoperable, but not perfect.
Interesting. Anybody else wants to say something on the interoperability part on decentralized? Because if not, I have another question. And don't worry, here in the room, you will have ample time to ask your questions just in a few minutes. But we want to prioritize a bit our people who follow us remotely. And the question is the following: if it's not countries that could potentially, as we heard through changes of government, sort of misuse digital ID systems, and yes, history has probably taught us that we should anticipate this possibility, then it's the countries that might issue IDs, decentralized, centralized ones, federated ones, whatever the system is. Is that true? And how do we think about this? Does that mean that actually as soon as our identity is digital, somebody can always shut it down? And is this different than what the situation is like today already? Raphael?
I don't know what means really shutting down, because even in our passports and identity cards, there is a civil register behind, so, and it's heavily central. The point is, it's true that if we rely on a private identity, is how much do we trust this private provider? And I think if we look at the current world, where there are many digital identities, not linked to who you are in the real life, neither to your legal identity, you probably don't log the same way on your tax system, state tax portal, on your bank account, and on your personal blog. So in the end, the question is, who do you trust? Some people are very fine to use the logins, the buttons that are existing. Some other are very fine to use MetaMask and other decentralized thing. But in the end, you could say, they're all Americans, so should we want to do that? And should we not prefer a European player or coming from elsewhere? So I think the key thing is, of course, any data can be erased, and even with physical identity, people lost their nationality in many numbers in the past days. So it could definitely happen. So again, what's important is that which framework and which legal framework do you give? So how much, let's say, importance, validity, authority you want to give to this digital identity? Can it change over time? And also, is it interoperable? And the question, what you mentioned is very true. We need to be sure that we can move from one garden to the other.
Thank you. I think this is very interesting and actually a very natural segue to a last quick question that I wanted to ask you before we want to have a discussion, all of us together, so you can already start thinking about questions you might want to ask or points you want to raise. So we heard that digital ID is a very important topic, that there are certain choices that are taken right now that will probably not go away, and that we should really think hard about not only commercial opportunities, efficiencies, but also about the consequences of the choice of one system over the other. It has consequences for the individual, it has consequences for commercial entities and users, and for the provision of governmental services. So if you were to say that decentralized digital IT system gives really interesting, as a cutting edge technology, really interesting perspectives of user data control, of interoperability and potentially others. If this were to be the most ethical direction of digital identity for the future, the near future or more midterm future, what would need to happen for this technology, because it's still nascent, to become mainstream? And what would need to happen? I have basically 3 questions, and I would love to try again this sort of rapid fire round. From a technical point of view, what would need to happen? From a market point of view, what would need to happen? And from a governance point of view, what would need to happen? Technology, market, and governance to mainstream decentralized ID systems. Who wants to go first?
I can. For me, whatever the angle, business, governance, technology, the key thing is, does it solve an issue? Because otherwise it's useless. And I think the main issue we have now, and I agree with you, in 6 months everything will be different, is the current one pain point we have is that there is too many passwords. So this is going to disappear very soon, very likely, as you said, because standardization has opened the way to the removal of passwords. And this was missing in the past years. And for me, the current main issue we have is how to make sure that an information is produced by a human, because we are overwhelmed and there is information warfare everywhere, and it's traceability of data, which is a current pain point we have in our current world. So if that decentralized identity can solve that, and if we can be sure that 2 things, in any information we get, there is a human behind, and it's not a foreign nation, but
proof of life.
The proof of life, as you mentioned. And second is, can I link all my data with a single point, so that if I want to remove access to that data, I can do it very quickly, especially when it's lost somewhere, training models, I don't know to do what.
Other perspectives on the technical, market, and governance conditions we would need to mainstream? I'm sure, Ingo, that you have a lot of thoughts about that. Please.
So technical, I would say, I wouldn't call them challenges. I would call them opportunities, because there's lots of things in technology, like proof of life, like proof of personhood. You can continue, like also in the ZK proof stuff. So many things to do which are not solved. Still, it already works, so start with it and make great things on top of it. So that's no, I wouldn't say, so there's nothing missing to start, and there's lots of opportunities to make it even cooler. So that's from the technical perspective. Market perspective, I would say, as I said before, there's huge opportunity for issuers. Issuing credentials is one of the biggest markets in the world. The whole publishing industry is issuing basically a credential to an article saying this is under this brand. So it's huge.
What's the total addressable market of digital ID?
I have read a lot and I can't figure it out.
Just roughly, are we talking
trillions per year?
Trillions per year.
Yeah, it's huge. So this market is absolutely huge. It should be addressed by people. And the third one was
Governance.
I don't think. Okay. And this is excluding the credential market, and this comes on top. So it's really huge.
So over 1.3 trillion per year, even right now already.
Yeah, it's really big, and the other thing, I think governance is something which comes a bit later, actually. So no offense, but it's cool that you guys already think of these things and that they are on the table. But it has, with technology, normally it does not happen first in governments. It happens first in industry, and then it trickles down to governments. So.
Any other views or on this on the question of mainstream adoption and the technical market and governance drivers?
I would say for any kind of technologies can be centralized or decentralized. One key point for me will be transparency in governance. But I mean, that can be managed at the level of the European Union. It just depends on how it's designed.
So when you say transparency of governance, you mean of the technical architecture or of the frameworks that govern?
No, it's transparency on the way it's used, our data are used, and the way it works. I mean, people are less concerned in the infrastructure, except some tech-savvy people who say, "Oh, I want this kind of infrastructure to be adopted." But actually, for most people, they don't care. What they want to do is to know if their data, if there's a breach, if the police or the tax system or whatever can have a look on it, control, if my insurance company can get some information from my Apple Watch, for example, to know if I'm at risk for this kind of disease or that kind of disease or whatever. If the company I work for can, for example, know something about my health condition or whatever, where I live or what, all of that is key for the people. So transparency is important. So, and with transparency comes data minimization, and it goes in the way you were mentioning. So the way I can decide how I share my data, so I can share more if I want. And that can be valuable for many ways. I can also share for good, for the common good. I can share for research, for example. I can accept, for example, to share with CNRS the data from my Apple Watch just because they do a research on men living in Paris, whatever, in, I don't know, nutrition or sport or whatever. This is something I could decide to do. So it's not only to give less, it's to give what I want to give to whom I want to give. And the second point for me in terms of governance is, but it goes in your way, Raphael, creating a trustworthy third party. So we need, if it's not the government, if it's not companies, who could be, I mean, in Estonia, I think they have a specific and independent body to manage that. In some countries, that could be a way. In some cultures, that can be a way, because if we go to touch back to this point that it has to be inclusive, so everybody has to be able to deal with it. So, I mean, my mother, who is not able to manage her computer, is supposed to have a digital ID if needed for any, I don't know, just to pay her tax. And that needs, I mean, there's once again, there's a trade-off between inclusiveness, means a kind of accessibility, simplicity, and so on, and also, for example, protection, data protection, and so on. So we need to find the right way, having this kind of trustworthy people or bodies able to manage that for the people who cannot manage their own digital ID and issue their own credential and so on.
Thank you very much. Cecilia, I know that in general, international organizations and the OECD cannot single out one technology over the other, and that what you try to do is technology agnostic and future-proof. But what is your view if it were decentralized technology or that is the best available option from the current innovation cycle? How would you see the technical, the market forces and the governance forces? Is whatever the choice will be, what will become mainstream? Is this the task of governments and international organizations to propose and to stimulate? Is it the market that should do it, or what are there discussions in that regard as well? In when you discuss basically recommendations for digital identity?
Yes. So in our recommendation and through the work that we've done with countries, I mean, working together, the private sector and the public sector is one of the key aspects as mentioned. So in our work, it's not about public sector going to provide everything or decide anything, because that wouldn't work. That is being done in some countries in very low uptake. So innovation requires the private sector to be involved and so on. So that's important. I think that what's relevant to talk about is from a governance aspect in order to make this happen is really about first recognizing that it's a complicated topic and that it's not like a quick fix or like one solution is going to make everything work. So it's really important that that's recognized and that there's a lot of work happening at the back that no one is seeing. And that's important, and whether that is in the public or private sector. And then something which is often coming up, especially when you start talking about cross-border use. So it's the importance of liability, and if something goes wrong. So it doesn't matter then what type of system it is, but it has to be, because who is responsible? If I use a solution that is provided to me in a country and I go somewhere else and something goes wrong, that I'm not who I am, the person I say I am, and who is responsible for that? There's still a lot of issues to be solved, and that's currently being discussed, but that's really a major issue that regulators and countries are looking at when they're. And then I think what we see, because also in this discussion, we see that I think it's important to also educate people, or not educate, to be transparent and to train and to talk about what this is, because I think there's still a lot of, it's a complicated issue and still many don't even know what it is about. And then we are having these complicated discussions and at the European level, and I think few people really even know what it is about and how it will affect their lives. They just think about the end solutions. So maybe that's important. And for the market, I think that a lot of the focus we do is really thinking about the essential services. So like how solutions that enable access to, I'm not a representative, we don't work directly with the financial sector, but I mean financial sector is a big player in this field. And then of course it's like everyone needs access to financial sector services. So my bank account, everyone needs access sometime, not so often maybe, to public services, health services and so on. And it's really important that you think about those sectors and how you can make it better.
Thank you. Fascinating. I hope everybody's learning a lot. We want to open this up now, and I want to give the floor to my colleague Sarah Nicole, who's the Policy and Research Associate of our institute, to take on your questions.
Thank you very much to our panelists for this great inputs and insight to our discussion. I think we can give them a first round of applause for this first part. So our discussion was really well balanced into the technical, but also the social, but also the business challenges, opportunities of digital identity system, but also the decentralized ID system. So I have one question online, and I would like to pursue the discussion with you in the room. I'm going to give the mic around. We're going to have around 15 minutes, but right after this, we'll have the chance to have a cocktail just downstairs where we could continue our informal exchange and the discussion we can pursue. I'm going to start with the first question online, and I'm going to give you 2 more minutes, the time that the panelists will answer this question online, and then I will take 3 to 4 questions first, and we'll see if we have time for more. So the question online is, digital identity versus data. What is the most valuable? Imagine your life of data is an expensive car. What has the most value? The car keys, identity, bracket, or the car? Would any of the panelists would try to take this one first? And I would ask in the room who would want to have a question. Okay, please, the panelists, you can start.
If there's no data, there's no digital identity, I would say. So I would say data is if you have to choose.
Yeah, but I mean, when you say to someone, I give you the keys of the car, means I give you the car. So, I mean, the answer is in the question for me. But yeah, I agree with you.
Identity is data.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very good. I like this guy.
We are going to come to the room with the first question.
Perfect. Sorry. Yes, absolutely. My name is Kulini Abendroth, and I'm a doctoral candidate on regulatory approaches to AI. So I apologize, but I have 2 quick questions. One is on this adoption of a centralized versus a decentralized approach in different contexts. We talked about Saudi Arabia, we talked about India. I'm just curious to understand, how do we know that it's working in these contexts? And what are public attitudes towards how it's working in these contexts? So has it just been kind of a top-down approach where, do we even know how the public is reacting to the adoption of a centralized approach in these 2 contexts? And number 2, can you perhaps talk a little bit more about the commercial drivers behind a decentralized approach? How can we incentivize financial companies or developers to support a more decentralized approach? Thanks.
Just about India and adoption. I mean, the point is not digital ID. I mean, people don't care. The point is what you get. And if you get human rights, if you get healthcare, if you get the possibility to open a bank account, if you're someone and before in the society you were nobody, that makes a huge difference. How it comes, it's less important.
Sorry, yeah, thank you. So I just wanted to comment on the system in India, because from what I've seen is that actually specifically those marginalized groups that didn't have access did not gain more access through that system, and were actually more marginalized, because once you went digital, it was the only way to gain access, so that it was even more difficult for them to gain access to certain basic services. So I think, as much as I agree with your point, I think there's also the risk of actually even exacerbating some of the marginalizations.
I agree with you, but I'm not sure decentralized would have solved the issue you're describing, just to be sure.
No, and yeah, I mean, the point is, each time you rely on the technology and not everybody has an access to the technology, you can create a digital divide. That's obvious. But I mean, some studies, especially made, including by the French government, just to have a look on what's happening in other countries, which will never be implemented as it is in those countries in Europe or in France. We see that it helped a lot, especially during the pandemic. So probably, for sure, it's not perfect. For sure, a lot of people are left away, but it was useful for a lot of people. So it basically improved the overall situation of the society. That's what those studies show.
I can also add that at the OECD, we try to look at adoption and different countries, and then you have it was primarily like government provided solution, and those that are under European, some of them. But it's hard because in some countries you have like either you have for specific services you have to use this solution, and so there's no choice. And then you can look at adoption then, but then there's no other option. So it might look like they have very high adoption, but there's no choice. So it's hard to, I guess I'm not an expert on the case in India, but I think there are a lot of challenges there that probably we'll hear about. But yeah, it's a very specific context. But these questions on adoption is very hard. I mean, also, if you have a society where you have a very big actor that provides a solution, even if it's the private sector, and as in Sweden, it's a very digitalized country. Everything is accessed through your phone. Everything is on your phone, really. So if you lose your phone, it's very hard. And there's one big provider, and everyone's using that one. And I think the main perception is that everyone is really happy, but there's not so many options. So we don't know, but I mean, everyone is using it, so that's how they think that it's a good thing in a way.
Hi, my name is Beatrice, and I'm an undergraduate student here in Sciences Po. And I wanted to hear about the panel's opinion regarding a similar thing on the implementation of the digital identity on different cultures, in the sense that it's been mentioned that it has to do usually with the culture's trust in government and things like that. Now, personally, I'm from Estonia, and to me, trust in government is something obvious, but also, as mentioned by you actually, we don't have the choice. Everything that I need to do, I have to do using my digital ID, be it taxes, be it whatever. And so, in my opinion, the trust comes with the fact that I'm obliged to do this. So my question is, don't you think that if we simply implemented this, at least on a European level, the digital identity, wouldn't the trust in government and the cultural aspect just come in itself?
Hello, and thank you for the excellent discussion. My name is Jérôme Buchler. I'm an independent researcher and technical expert in digital public infrastructures. I work with more than 20 countries, mostly low and middle income countries in Asia and Africa. On those topics, one very quick general comment and one question for Mr. Rübe. The comment is, and I'm not saying that's the message that you've sent to the audience, but I think it's worth reminding that decentralized, centralized, it's not mutually exclusive, and it's like a spectrum, right? I'm yet to see a digital ID system that is fully centralized or fully decentralized, and in my view, successful digital ID programs are the ones that, based on the context, make the right choice, pick the right options, like I centralize this function, this service, and I pick some decentralized solutions for authentication, for example, right? That being said, my question for Mr. Rübe, for Ingo. You said, Ingo, that identity solutions should be decentralized. There are a number of challenges that I see here with my bias of working in those low and middle income countries, right? But still relevant, I find. I'll pick two of them because the list is long. It's uniqueness and linking identities, linking the self-sovereign, the decentralized identities to the actual civil identities, right? My question, and also it means that I didn't do my homework. I haven't read about the KILT protocol, but my question for you is that does the KILT protocol integrate some mechanisms to address those two specific points, or is that managed on top of the protocol? Thank you.
So what KILT protocol does is implementing verifiable credentials and DIDs, and that's probably what that is. And so the question. The answer to the question is how do I get the government ID into this thing? Well, it's a credential.
So there's no built-in mechanism, touch points to interface to interface with government, the government, or no discussion started in order.
Of course not, because it is it's not opportunistic, the system. It is infrastructure. It's just infrastructure. It's just like your government also prints the passport somewhere, right? Look at KILT as the printing press. That doesn't really care how you print the passport. And any passport can be built on it, but it needs to be open to be successful. So if it is a passport, or if it's just you saying that you decide who's a nice person or not, or if it is your public library, or if it's the university here issuing the papers like you graduated here. So this doesn't make a difference for the system. It all looks the same. And so it is. This is what the standard says, actually. So it's this is what we standardized like 5 years together with 350 companies that become independent of the actual use case. Was that the answer to your question?
Yes, if we want to go there, because you will need, at some point, many users will need to. We will need those touch points to boost the trust on the decentralized identity at some point, and to ensure uniqueness. That is a valuable characteristic for most service providers on those identities. So we will need those touch points. But I understand your answer is that no, it's not built in the protocol, those, because yes, it's ad hoc, because each government, there's no standard for government to interface this kind of thing. And so you expect government to to consider DIDs and VCs for that to happen, right?
So in Europe, we already have the governments which say verifiable credentials. We use that system. They're not yet at the DIDs. But one word for trust and truth. Trust is what the government enjoys, right? So you trust the government, and this is why, and many people may trust the government, and if I have a credential from this government, then I can travel to another country because this country trusts my country, and that I am. The truth is always in the identifier, because this is used to sign the credential. This is like showing my face together with myself. My passport cannot travel together with you to another country because we look different. So this is what the ID actually brings in. So the truth linking me to this virtual piece of paper or piece of plastic, whatever you want. So this is the truth part. The trust part, and this is really, really important, because blockchain people always talk about truth only. So yeah, because it's the mathematical truth. We don't believe that truth alone is enough. You need trust. This is culturally really important for us. We trust churches, we trust our parents, we trust organizations, governments, whatnot, even the public library we trust. And this is where the big business models come in, but this is also what we need to feel comfortable. And the technology has to follow this way. And this is why VCs and DIDs are actually rebuilding the structure that we have in the physical world, right? So, but then the government is an issuer of a credential and not the issuer of the DID. That's me. Right? Not for you.
I wish I didn't have to cut this very interesting conversation on trust, which is actually central to most of the, not just digital identity system, but also every use and adoption of technologies. But I don't want us to forget our Estonian friend question that can also relate to a little bit to the response. So would any of the panelists would like to take a stab at this question? Yes.
So for me, the mandatory aspect is one way to do the change management with the introduction of the technology, whether it's centralized or decentralized. To come back also to the question of data, so we are deploying a digital identity in more than 100 countries, and in most of the case, they are followed by a platformization, what we call it, meaning the state is opening web services to replace going to a cashier. And so in some countries, it's very successful, and the Middle East is highly successful. Some others, it completely fails, and people continue to interact with it. And one of the two differentiators, so one is clearly on corruption, I mentioned it. One is on how the state is directing their citizens to use the solution, either by incentives or by law, simply. And definitely also, you can also have some, let's say, finer way to distribute your citizens. Some countries are very good at keeping the infrastructure for people that are have a less friendly use of technology, elderly, people with disabilities, so to make it more accessible and directing people that are more digital savvy, for example, toward the the digital portals. And so there is definitely different panels on way to do that. And definitely the technology itself is useless if it does not go with the change management and transformation.
We're going to take two final questions, so this one and this one.
Thank you. My name's Adam. I work for a company called Ledger that manufactures a hardware wallet for blockchain, digital currencies, NFTs, etc. We talked a lot about today the use of digital ID and governments and the vertical implementations, but I also think content publication is a really important factor because we're at the beginning of an S-curve of AI, and AI generative content is a very interesting situation because it's amazing for creation and creativity, but also done with bad intentions creates bad outcomes. And there's an infinite number of examples of this just in the short history we've had. And my question to the panel is, how can decentralized ID play a part, or how might we use decentralized ID to try and solve the anonymous publication of content that can create significant impact on everybody that's horizontal across all cultures and all countries?
So yeah, this is exactly the point I mentioned. The major pain point we have is traceability of data, either to follow our own data or to make sure that data that is being produced is genuine. For me, agree with you that decentralized identity would be let's say, a silver bullet. My question is on the ability to move fast, especially in adoption on merchants, government portals, and institutions versus big tech players that are moving very fast also. So for me, there it's more a question of velocity and speed of adoption, because the pain point is there and we'll have to solve it in the month, if not years to come.
Your neighbor Christine was already smiling because we're currently writing on a paper about that. So the current working hypothesis is that that there's probably in the future no content that is not written assisted by AI. So, and you will never find out if it is actually AI content, half AI content, totally human content. Probably human content is the worst in the end because also humans can lie. So it doesn't really help if you prove that the personhood behind that. What is interesting is actually to prove the accountability for what you do. And this is, so we call it proof of accountability, and the paper is not ready, but as soon as it's ready, I'm going to send it.
I'm going to take one question here and a final one that's going to be very short. So these two together, and then I'll leave you the floor to respond.
Hello. Thank you for the enlightening discussions. I have one question. My name is Antoine. I work as an IT consultant in Paris. My question is, do you see any danger in the long term where the states, the governments will choose which companies, which DAOs will provide the IDs for their citizens as they issue passports, basically their digital identity or also physical identity? And we're in a time where it's not yet registered, not yet the governments maybe don't really care about it, and you are able to propose new things. But do you think that in a few times, only a few will be selected, or maybe the one that the state chooses? Thank you.
Please keep this one in mind.
Hi everyone, Virgile Deville. I used to work in digital democracy, and I also was part of an experiment called Proof of Humanity. And I was wondering whether you think universal basic income is a good driver for adoption of decentralized identity solutions.
I'll leave the floor to the panelists to respond to this too. Final question.
Perhaps a quick answer to the first one, just my view on that. I think that the government doesn't have to choose the providers, but to define the specifications. If we want those technologies to be interoperable, if we want everybody to be able to choose the kind of solution more or less user-friendly, more or less secure, and so on, And if we want them to be connected, especially globally, we need governments and perhaps international institutions to be able to issue standards. And from that, let the market do the job also, because the best ones will probably also have more users than the ones who are less suitable or less difficult or more difficult to use. Sorry, job for you.
No, I just wanted to jump in because it's a very interesting question. Oh, both questions are very interesting, but the first one, like what they're doing now at the European level, I'm not saying it's a good or bad thing, but with the certification and the standards and accreditation, I see it's a way that they're trying to make it, because also I think one of what they're trying to do is like the option is maybe that what we're seeing now which is not either a bad or a good thing, but in the US, for example, you have Apple providing wallets, and now they're issuing digital driver's license. And so these very big players and of course, everyone has an iPhone, and it will be very easy to use. So what they're doing at the European level, at least, I guess they're trying to make it possible for different providers to provide solutions and so on. But then, of course, there's also always a risk. So I think what's important is to make it very transparent and make it very easy to see who they are and to follow the whole process. And I think that's a good practice, but I don't think that's like a perfect. There's always risks, I think, and it's a very good question.
To bounce back on the providers and the wallets, when the Apple Pay was out in 2016, many European banks said they never want to put their payment credential on the secure element of Apple, and started their own software protection, and that is gone. And it's a question I've always had. In the end, since either Apple or others, or Google, it's in the pocket of everybody. We have to treat the digital divide for sure, but in the end, convenience is driving everything, as you said. For some cases, could there be some emission of credential with a reduced authority and accountability? I don't know, but it's clearly a question because in the end, convenience is doing everything.
Would anyone try to answer the universal basic income one? It was a tricky one. That's a full story, but can we try in 30 seconds?
Universal.
People are thirsty, and I promised them
universal basic income is always good, and if it comes together with DIDs, it's even better.
Just answering in one question: who will give the money? That's the point for me.
Thank you very much. I know I promised you the buffet. Just a logistical point: you will all be able to take the elevator on your own, like grown up. Because to get down, you just have to press 0. That's where we're all going to meet, so you're free. Just after the closing remarks, that will be done by Paul Fellinger, who has a microphone.
Yes, well, I will be very brief. Thank you so much. Fascinating discussion. I have the feeling that we just start to understand how important actually this topic is. And I'm sure that a lot of people who are not working on digital identity do not realize how important it is. I think we understood very clearly that infrastructure and architecture choices matter. It's highly complex, and I think we should all make an effort to learn what is actually behind the different systems, technically speaking, but it is cutting edge. It's very complex. At the same time, we see that some choices are made by governments, by companies, and there are market dynamics at play. And so we are at the moment in the technology cycle, basically, where we will see the mainstream development of some solutions over the others. And I think the point of fragmentation or the risk of fragmentation of fragmented approaches, this is something to take very seriously, I think, and have a discussion about this. This is also a massive market opportunity. It's 1.3 trillion market, we heard, digital ID just today. We're not talking about tomorrow or in 5 years. And I think everybody virtually and here in the room has now understood that there's a massive potential of unintended ethical consequences with regards to the choices that we make. So this begs the question, what can we do? How can we foster, in knowing all of this, responsible innovation with regards to digital ID? And this is why we are so delighted to team up with the Human Technology Foundation and Eric's amazing team and Eric himself to try to drill down and understand what are both the technical specifications but also the ethical specifications that we should look at when we deploy or make those choices about digital IT systems. So we will embark together on a multi-stakeholder initiative trying to analyze the best practices in the ecosystem and try to understand exactly those consequences from a commercial point of view, from a technical point of view, but especially from an ethical and societal point of view. So we look forward to a lot of exchanges with all of you on those topics. Again, we are very happy that you are here at Project Liberty's McCourt Institute, and we really look forward to your continued engagement. And those of you who want to know more about the initiative and how to engage, please reach out to Eric and me now at the cocktail. And we would love to have this discussion. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul. Actually, we're really excited with this project. And we're happy that it starts by a cocktail. Thank you very much.
Thank you.